Well, the Bible teaches that God foreknows everything that happens. The New Testament has a whole vocabulary of Greek words with the prefix pro, P-R-O, like prognosos, for knowledge, promartureo, foretell, praorizo, foreordain. So the New Testament clearly teaches that God has foreknowledge of all these things that are going to happen. Now the fatalist says that if God foreknows what you're going to do, then when the time arrives for you to do it, you're not free to do anything else because God cannot be mistaken. And since he has believed from eternity that you're going to do it, that means you're fated to do it. It seems to me, however, that the argument for logical or theological fatalism commits a fallacy in modal logic. This is the logic of necessity and possibility. The fatalist reasons like this: necessarily, if God foreknows X, then X will happen. 2, God foreknows X. 3, therefore, necessarily, X will happen. So, premise 1, necessarily, if God foreknows X, then X will happen. 2, God foreknows X. 3, therefore, necessarily, X will happen. And if X happens necessarily, it means it's not free. That commits a logical fallacy. From the two premises, you cannot deduce that necessarily X will happen. All that follows is simply X will happen, but not necessarily. It could fail to happen. But if it were to fail to happen, then God would have foreknown something different. So by your actions, you have the ability, by what you do, in a sense, to determine what God will have believed in the past. His knowledge is sort of like an infallible barometer of the weather. The barometer never fails. It's always right. But clearly, the barometer doesn't determine the weather. If the weather were different, the barometer would have been different. So the foreknowledge of God is like an infallible barometer, and you're free to do whatever you want, but you're just not free to fool the barometer. God knows whatever it is you do. So your action is logically prior to what God foreknows, but his foreknowledge is chronologically prior to what you do.
That was great. Thank you.
Sure.